Welcome, welcome, everybody. I see lots of people already coming in. We're going to just wait a minute or two just to let everybody get settled in our virtual office today, virtual stage. Wow, 100, 150 people. We've got lots to talk about today. Welcome if you're just joining us. Like I said, going to wait probably one more minute to get started. We are going to respect your time and make sure we end on time because everybody's really busy. And wow, we're almost at 200 people. Very exciting. We have lots to talk about today. It looks like Jocelyn just raised her hand. Jocelyn, if you have a comment or question, you can throw it in the chat and I will answer it. Anybody who has, it looks like we have a couple questions. So if you've raised your hand for anything, feel free to throw the question in the chat. I'll probably be answering a lot of your basic administrative housekeeping questions in just a second, and then our panelists will certainly be answering a lot of questions. Okay, people are still coming in. We're well over 200 people now. Good morning to everyone. Well, excuse me. Good morning for me. Good afternoon for many of you. Somewhere in between for others. Welcome to those who are just joining us. We're going to get started in just a minute because people I see are still coming in. Okay, well, we have a lot to cover today, so I am going to get started. Jocelyn, you had a question. Can you throw it in the chat for me? Just want to make sure the chat function is working. I'm not seeing any chats yet. Okay, well, we'll figure that out as we go. Welcome, everybody. Oh, good morning. Our chat is working. Excellent. Good afternoon, good morning, greetings to all. Welcome to this event, everyone. On the front lines, rapid response efforts for new arrivals, organizing TPS and work permit clinics. Hello to everyone. We are going to put a Zoom poll right now into the mix here, and that's going to help us, instead of everyone throwing in the chat where you're coming from, please answer the poll. That's just going to help us get a sense of geography, organization, where we're all dialing in. So feel free to answer the poll. Max, you can throw that into the mix. There's the poll. So please take a second, answer the questions there. It's very, very quick. We will see all the responses coming in. Thanks to everybody who's answering. We are great. Keep going with the poll. While you're doing that, I just have to say, we already have 250 people on this webinar right now. I think we had over 500 people sign up, which is just amazing. And it totally demonstrates the need and the hunger for the information and resources you all have. And I promise you, you will not be disappointed with the panelists that we have speaking today. And I'm really, really excited. But before I get to them, a couple items of housekeeping. Please, please, please add your questions to the Q&A function. Feel free to use the chat to chat it up with each other. That's totally great. But specific questions for our panelists and attendees, please add to the Q&A. That will help us keep everything streamlined because we do have a Q&A section at the end. And that will make sure we can get to as many questions as possible. We are recording this right now, and note that the recording will be up on the Immigrant ARC website, and we will certainly share a link with that at the end, along with many, many resources, tangible takeaway resources for you. We have a QR code all set up. You can have your phone ready, scan it, and you'll get those resources at the ready. I'll remind you of that at the end, but those will be there for you. And let's see, Sarah, could you go to the next slide, please? A very quick rundown of our agenda. Welcome and introductions from me. I'm part of the Immigrant ARC communications team, do a lot of facilitating. We are going to be moving on to our panelists in just a second, and we will have presentations from each of them, a national overview, a New York overview, California overview, and Massachusetts overview, so give you a great snapshot of the entirety of the US handling rapid response situations. And then we'll have time with our Q&A. So again, a reminder, please, please, please put your questions in the Q&A function. And finally, the most important part, Sarah, if you could move to the next slide, please. A very brief overview, because you'll be hearing a lot from them, of our incredible presenters. Our panelists are the one and only Camille Mackler, the Executive Director of Immigrant ARC in New York City, Esmeralda Flores, Southern Region Policy Manager at the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights in San Diego, Carla Aguayo, Director of Legal Programs at CHIRLA as well in LA, and Jessica Chico, Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition MIRA in Boston. And we are lucky to be moderated by Luis Garza. He's the Legal Services and Capacity Building Manager at the National Partnership for New Americans. And I'm going to turn it over to Luis right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leanne, and hello, everyone. Great to see you here. Such a great turnout. And my name is Luis Garza, and I am the Legal Services and Capacity Building Manager at NPNA. But before we get started, I wanted to share, just so we know who's here in the room, you can see here the results from the poll. So a lot of folks joining that are nonprofit legal service providers, community-based organizations, city and government agencies, and then also folks that have some experience providing assistance to newly arrived immigrants in the community, and others that are hoping to do it in the future. So it looks like we have a great mix of folks here in the virtual room today. So we invite you to participate throughout the event and make sure that you share your questions with us as they come up and our speakers are talking today. If we go to the next slide, please. So just a little bit about NPNA, the National Partnership for New Americans. We are a national coalition of 66 immigrant and refugee organizations across 40 different states. And we work with our members to advance immigrant equity and inclusion policies, also to build and expand capacities around immigration legal services and immigrant inclusion programming, and also drive campaigns that strengthen democracy through increased civic participation. So you can see here some of our main pillars of our work and the map of where our NPNA members are. We want to thank our member organizations today, IARC, MIRA, and CHIRLA, for co-convening today's webinar that will look into the work that organizations are leading, especially in collaboration with government partners to receive and welcome migrants. So today, as Leanne mentioned, we will dive deeper into the recent efforts of large-scale legal clinics that have assisted thousands of immigrants in applying for TPS, or temporary protected status, and work authorization or employment authorization documents. And as many of you know, NPNA and our members and partners have spent years helping to advocate for and strengthening a welcoming infrastructure throughout the country by building legal service capacities, also growing our cities and counties for citizenship network, or CC4C, a network of local governments. And then also, as you'll hear a little bit more about today, forging community partnerships that are on the front lines of receiving and welcoming newcomers. Also, our network has demonstrated how quick response structures can be activated so that organizations can create solution-focused frameworks, as we all call on the federal government to provide greater support to our local efforts to meet newcomers with basic needs and opportunities to build their lives in cities across the country. So if we go to the next slide, here you can see some of the work that is happening across the country. And last year, for example, NPNA created our Always Welcome initiative to convene and support our network of organizations and local governments in responding to welcome new arrivals into our cities. So we wanted to share here a few of the updates and ways that you all can engage. One of them is by looking at the Always Welcome Toolkit, which is a toolkit that contains resources and strategies around narrative, response efforts, and also legal resources. And we're also in the process of creating an Always Welcome directory where we will be coordinating and supporting the needs of asylum seekers looking to move to other parts of the country. And this directory will help individuals and families navigate services and resources provided by localities and nonprofit organizations. And so we invite organizations to be included in this directory by completing a survey, which we'll put the links in the chat in just a second. And the information that we collect in this survey will be shared with new arrivals as they are arriving in different cities throughout the country. And then last but not least, I wanted to highlight the Community Navigator and Inclusion Institute, which is NPNA's new training and capacity building initiative for members and non-members around immigration, inclusion efforts, and welcoming newcomer strategies for government and partners more broadly. So we have a form where you can inquire more about this training and how it might be available for you in your area. And we'll make sure I see folks asking about these, so we'll share them. All the resources that are mentioned today will be shared with participants after the webinar. So again, it's so great to see all the great turnout today, and we're grateful to the leaders who will speak to these efforts and lessons learned, and especially share ideas of what more we can do to coordinate these efforts and help newcomers be received with dignity as we collectively meet this moment. And today we're highlighting the work of 3 organizations in 3 different cities, but we know that these efforts are happening throughout the country. So we look forward to also hearing from you all about what your city and organizations are doing to welcome new arrivals in the community. So after these presentations, as Leanne mentioned, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A and try to answer as many questions as we get today, and share the resources that our panelists will be talking about today. So thank you again, excited for the conversation today. And with that, we'll start with the efforts happening in New York, and alternate to Camille Mackler, the Executive Director of Immigrant ARC. Take it away, Camille.
Thank you, Luis. As I think maybe one of the newest members of NPNA, we're very excited to be here. And very excited to be joining this incredible cohort, and all of you. We're at almost 300, which is amazing. And we actually had over 600 people sign up, which I think just really shows the need for these conversations. And we're really grateful for the opportunity to bring everyone together for what I'm sure is the first of many as we continue to move forward in this new wave of response needs. So I'm the Executive Director of Immigrant ARC. We launched in 2017. We were a project of the New York Immigration Coalition. So many of you may have known me or known the organization when we were there. We officially became our own nonprofit in 2020, and our mission here in New York is to increase access to counsel and access to justice. And we do that through a lot of different programs, and by maximizing current investments from city, state, the philanthropic field, private donors, and others, to sort of make sure that every effort has a ripple effect here in New York. Next slide. We are at our heart a rapid response organization. Our origin story actually has its roots in the response to the Muslim ban at JFK Airport. That's sort of where we got our start. And we'd been doing some work before that, even to try to get legal services to collaborate and convene here in New York City and in New York State. And so rapid response is sort of part of the DNA of everything that we do. And we have a very unique position and a very unique role to play, where we're able to leverage our partnerships with government agencies, nonprofit, professional associations, law firms, and more. We act as a liaison between the local offices of federal agencies and providers. And so that really gives us the ability to, when we need to, lean on those partnerships and serve immigrant communities better and more effectively in New York. We sort of, in our view, work with anybody who's providing legal services. We don't just represent nonprofits, although our members are by and large nonprofits, but we have really great relationships with many professional associations and bar associations here in New York. And we engage in peer-to-peer learning and resource sharing. And so the crux of our programming is our monthly member meetings, where we share a lot of information out, where lawyers and legal providers, not just lawyers, come together and can share resources and strategies. And from all of that, everything else grows. And so I just want to make a plug. If you're here and if you're on this webinar, you're in New York and you are providing legal services, please reach out to a membership at Immigrant ARC if you're at all interested. We're free, so we're a really good bargain. You can, next slide, please. And so the focus of this webinar in 2023 we were really proud to partner with the New York Immigration Coalition, where we got our start, and we are launching a first of its kind statewide coordinated effort to provide rapid response services to immigrant communities, which we have named Welcoming New York Resettlement Campaign. And for us, that really is the bedrock of how we plan to carry our mission out moving forward throughout New York State. And that means we've been creating a network of access to services for immigrants, even though our members are all legal service providers, meaning that they have at least a lawyer or an accredited representative on staff. And we do that for reasons I can get into another time, but we do view legal services as much broader than just lawyers and accredited representatives. And we see, we know that it takes far more than just those kinds of professions to provide legal services. It takes community organizers and social workers and other social safety net organizations to sort of come together and support. And so we are, through Welcoming New York, we are aiming to create sort of a network that starts with welcoming and navigating the existing landscape all the way to connecting to services and receiving help. Because of recent events, we've been really focused on rapid response, particularly for people in shelters. There's a lot of reasons for that, but as you hear me talk a little bit about our work today, I just want to focus in on the fact that many of these have been aimed at people in either shelters in New York City or folks who are living in hotels that have been turned into shelters upstate. But our long-term goal is to use this moment to leverage it into engaging in capacity building so that we can really build a sustainable network for the future and not just meet today's needs, but really come up with something that will meet the needs of folks moving forward. And we're trying to reach underserved communities, especially, for those of you who've been working with recent arrivals, you know that it's not just Latin American, Central American, it's not just Spanish speakers. We're having an extraordinary amount of Africans coming, of other folks, and trying to meet the needs across all levels. So next slide, please. We began, I believe that we did the first round of, I think New York was the first sort of round of work permit clinics in partnership with federal agencies and city and state agencies. That was the last week of September and the first week of October, with the first round for this sort of moment, with arrivals from the border sort of being bused and arriving in different communities around the country. Obviously, a lot of it was modeled on what happened when Afghans were evacuated in 2021 and sort of learning that we've been doing over the last couple of years in terms of what partnerships are effective. But our clinics in New York, which I know have now been brought to other cities and improved upon, and I'm excited to hear more about that. And from the other speakers on this panel, sort of had a model of bringing in folks through the city shelter system, and then we were helping them prepare work permit applications. And then USCIS was on site to accept the applications, issue receipts, adjudicate fee waivers, and capture biometrics. Separately from that, we have continued to put on clinics. We actually did a sprint recently where we helped organizations file almost 800 TPS applications in the month of October, for residents of hotel shelters in upstate New York. And that took a lot of different coordination because a lot of the providers are a lot more scattered and resources are scarcer outside of New York City. But I think the important thing that we learned from all of this is that we have to be sharing. Like, we didn't have time to reinvent the wheel. We didn't have time to create new theories or strategies, and we had to really lean on people who are on the ground doing this work all the time, who were already starting to identify the issues that we needed to face. For example, for Venezuelan TPS, I've been an immigration attorney for 20 years. I've never seen this level of complicated TPS cases. And that's because migration patterns are changing and people are spending a lot of time in other countries. So now you're dealing with firm resettlement issues. You're dealing with the issues of children born abroad and having to prove that citizenship. You're dealing with sometimes issues of people who worked in the police or the military, and so having to deal with persecutor issues, as well as all the other host of issues that we often see coming up in immigration cases. And on top of that, people are being admitted to the country in different ways. So some people are immediately eligible for work authorization. For example, if they came in through a CBP-1 appointment, others are not. Others have to file asylum first. So just sort of managing all of that, really leveraging the lessons learned and a lot of the resources that we created in terms of addressing the needs that I just mentioned, in terms of trying to streamline things to make it easier for people to apply quicker and in big, large scale settings, because we really are trying to do this fast and quick. But as an attorney, I want to emphasize that we are absolutely trying to do it well, within our ethical rules. If you're a lawyer, making sure that we're filing things that are well prepared and that aren't going to be that aren't going to create more problems for people down the road, because by and large, these are pro se models. Really critical to sort of share that learning across all different kinds of communities, particularly those who are less resourced, for example, in rural areas. Really need an emphasis on trauma-informed services. We had several instances, I won't get into details, but where less culturally competent partners, got frustrated or things happened, and there were some pretty harsh conversations around, why you shouldn't call the police when you're trying to do an event that helps immigrants, things like that. And so just really thinking about that is very important. Partnerships across sectors are really key. We couldn't have done this, for example, without our law firm partners, because they provided so much access to technology that we simply couldn't afford, or more importantly, just didn't have the time to just sort of go out, buy and set up within, the week that we were trying to do things. And so having law firms help us with that, and with volunteers, private associations, private bar associations helping us with like really large volunteer experts in immigration law, all of that was very, very, very key. And technology must catch up is my last point. We are increasingly using technology to do hybrid models, not just because of, the pandemic and all the health concerns, which is really where we started pioneering that, but because it's the best way that we have of taking, volunteers in places like New York City, where we were literally turning volunteers away for those clinics and engaging them so that they can help folks upstate without actually having to travel the 7 hours to Buffalo, or even the 3 hours to Albany from New York City. So I'm going to stop there because I've been talking for a while and I definitely don't want to take up too much time. But thank you all for being here. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Camille, for that update about what's happening in New York. So now we'll go over to the other side of the country, to California, to hear from Esmeralda Flores and Carla Guayo from the Coalition for Humane Immigrants' Rights, or CHIRLA, to talk more about your efforts. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone who joined us today. Again, my name is Esmeralda Flores with CHIRLA. So just to give you like a little bit of context of what's happening in California, because we are kind of like a border state, so we have like a lot of happening here. So we have folks who are coming through the border, and those efforts mostly directly from the San Diego border are being handled by our partners of the San Diego Rapid Response Network migrant shelter that's run by JFS, U.S. Family Service in San Diego. And then we also have the buses that are being sent from Texas to LA, almost kind of like on a weekly basis. So for that, just to give you a little bit of numbers, in October of this year, U.S. Border Patrol recorded over 188,000 encounters between just the ports of entry in the southwest border. The total number of encounters, including those plus those who entered through CBP or through the actual port of entry, was a little bit over 240,000 just last month. Now that we have the CBP One app as the process for folks to enter into the United States, in October, CBP processed more than 44,000 appointments. And since this process was created in January of this year till October, they have processed more than 324,000 appointments through the app, just in a little bit less than a year. So just to put that in context. And then when it comes to CHIRLA's direct efforts, we saw, as everyone here, we saw the trends, we saw the amount of people coming and the need to support. So we started to put together a small group of folks who were interested in preparing for LA to be eventually a receiving jurisdiction of new arrivals into the country. So we created a response plan. So we have basically two programs. We have what we call LA is Home, which is folks who arrive into Los Angeles, whether they were referred by partners or they made their own way into the region, they asked around and they ended up in our office, and we provide case management services for them. So since October of last year, we've received over 500 individuals who kind of randomly come into our office asking for basic support. That's one of the program. And the other program that we have is the LA Welcomes Collective. So if we can move to the next slide. And then we have the LA Welcomes Collective, which is a coalition of partners based in LA who wanted to support this effort and be ready in case we did get a big influx of folks coming into the region. And you can see all of our partners in the screen. And through them, we have been organizing since early this year. A little bit when we thought like Title 42 was going to end and we were going to see this big surge of folks. And then after that, we also folded in the city and the county of LA into some of the conversations to get them to understand like the political context and why people are coming and why we should expect and why we should be ready to receive folks in a humane and dignified and respectful way into the region. And through that, we have been through those efforts. Can we move to the next slide? Through those efforts with the LA Welcomes Collective, we have received 29 buses since June 14 of this year. Most of them, we got a little bit of notice that they were coming, so we were able to activate a rapid response system a day before, but we've gotten a handful of them that were unannounced too. And that also creates like a lot of logistical challenges for the region because we don't have like a welcome center, like a physical welcome center. We have to move around depending on whatever faith partner has lent us their space for the day. We have supported 1,047 individuals. Of those, 323 are 18 or older, and 116 are 5 years old of the population that we have received in the past 6 months. The top countries of origin or nationality that we see is Venezuela, Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and Colombia. And the final destinations within California, the top 3 have been Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. And out of California, some folks are going to Las Vegas and Seattle. So once folks get here, we offer a lot of like the basic services, food, legal orientation to our partners like Carecen and IMDEV. And then just support with either their families picking them up or for the few that are traveling out, we also try to support and coordinate travel arrangements for them. About 95% of the folks that we see have a sponsor and are able to move on that same day to their final destination. But we do, of course, have some folks that their sponsor backs down because they didn't understand that the process was going to be so long, or they thought their family member was going to come alone and they came with their family and they're not able to host the entire family in their home. Little things that happen when it comes to folks understanding fully the responsibility of a sponsor. So for those cases, and also like the folks who their final destination was LA and they intend to make LA their home, we provide long-term case management services in our office. And then part of that, it's also the legal services. So I'll pass it on to my colleague Carla so that she can speak more on the legal side of our welcoming efforts.
Thank you, Esmeralda. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending where you are joining us from. As Esmeralda mentioned, we are present at the bus arrival sites, and the legal services component starts from that moment. We are identifying people as those who are going to be traveling through, who will be receiving a little bit more hands-on guidance and information at the bus arrival site, know your rights presentations, trying to answer any questions that they might have, because we don't know how much access to legal services providers they will have at their the final city destination. For those that are going to stay in the LA area, then it's a little bit more focused on the other areas. It allows the service providers more time to support them after the initial arrival day. And so what that looks like is we are currently helping people, whether it's at the shelters where they are staying, or for CHIRLA, they come to our offices to receive support. And so At CHIRLA, for the most part, we're supporting the recent arrivals through our Pro Se clinic. We have, unfortunately, due to capacity limitations, been unable to provide full scope representation to a lot of them. We have been able to take some cases, but the vast majority we help through the Pro Se clinic. And what that is consultations. It's an in-depth look at their case, explaining to them the asylum requirements, kind of, trying to identify with them whether or not they have a viable asylum claim, what that's going to look like, what it's going to entail for them down the line. We explain the court process. We also support for those that are paroled. We are supporting with work permit applications, changes of address for those that need it, and motions to change venue for a lot of people, because we are seeing that at the border, really the agencies are doing whatever, they're writing whatever on the NTAs, they're filling in bogus addresses, even though the unrepresented migrants are saying, I'm going to LA, or I'm going to San Francisco, or I'm going here, I'm going there. The NTA shows that their court is going to be in New York or somewhere down south or in Texas, often cases as well. So we do see that a lot of the work is geared towards motions to change venues, changes of address. Currently, we are not offering direct support with asylum applications. However, that is something that we look forward to doing in the future. In terms of partnerships, we have developed partnerships with shelters to be able to house people and be able to reach them, specifically for those shelters that might be in hard to reach places. One of some of the challenges we're facing, of course, is transportation. For those of you that have visited LA, as wonderful as it is, getting around is quite difficult because it's so spread out. So transportation is a challenge. Another challenge is not having enough capacity countywide to be able to represent the recent arrivals in a way that would strengthen their case or make their cases in court much more viable. So that is a struggle for the legal services providers, wanting to do as much as we can, but then unfortunately realizing there's only so much we can do. And another challenge that I also saw brought up in the chat is trying to support folks when they don't have permanent or even stable addresses. So we do not here at CHIRLA as a practice provide our address as a mailing address for legal reasons, in terms of the responsibility that we might take on, because we're not able to communicate with people. We don't want to receive any sort of in absentia orders if we're not able to contact people once they leave our office. And so there are some challenges to the pro se model. However, moving forward, we are going to try and go larger scale to be able to help more folks than we're currently helping. So what that looks like is more consistent clinics, more we're going to delve into, hopefully we're exploring right now, the possibilities of actually hosting pro se asylum clinics, so that those that come through our doors are able to at least apply for asylum, as opposed to referring them out to other organizations or the private bar. So there is a lot of work to be done. So we're trying our best to kind of scale and see where we can do the most impact. And so thank you again. I know that was rapid fire. This is rapid response. So thank you all for the time.
Thank you, Carla and Esmeralda, for sharing about your efforts. And just a reminder for folks, if you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A function, and we'll go over as many as we can in the Q&A portion of the presentation. So then with that, we'll go back to the East Coast to learn what's going on in Massachusetts. So I'll turn it over to Jessica Kiko with the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. Mira, turn it over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Luis. And can we advance the slide, please? So MIRA is not primarily a service provider or really a rapid response organization. We are primarily an advocacy organization, but our strength in all this is that we are a convener because we are a coalition of over 100 organizations all across the state that are interested in improving the lives of immigrants and refugees in Massachusetts. We have lots of connections. And so when we saw an increase of new arrivals back in 2021, with about 2,000 Afghans arriving to the state, an increase in Haitian arrivals and then Ukrainian arrivals, we started kind of an informal meeting of a small number of advocates to really talk about access to benefits, making sure that benefits, state agencies knew how to interpret different documents that were being issued and how to determine benefits eligibility for folks. And out of that, that group grew into a much, much larger new arrivals working group that meets, it met weekly for quite some time. There was a lot happening, rapidly changing situation, and now meets every other week. And that brings together providers and advocates. And in every other meeting, we're also joined by state agencies, including the state's Office for Refugees and Immigrants. And that allows us to have a direct channel of feedback to the state and also for them to maintain the group informed. And what we do in that group, we identify systemic issues, we share resources and knowledge a lot, and we leverage each other's power for combined advocacy efforts. So we have housing advocates, we have benefits advocates, we have folks, on the ground with that are running food pantries or doing kind of immediate basic needs to new arrivals. And so we're all able to learn from each other. And that's one of the benefits of going last, is that you get to hear what everyone else says. And that's one of the common themes, right? Bringing folks together. The state also created a couple of what they called family welcome centers that were specific points of kind of front door entry for new arrivals, because we were seeing lots of newly arrived families in the waiting rooms and emergency rooms and in area hospitals. Even at the airport, the family welcome center was supposed to be kind of a safe space where folks could go and seek assistance with finding emergency shelter and other resources. We originally thought that there would be many more family welcome centers, like a dozen more popping up all across the state. That didn't materialize, but we still have the 2. So that's one area of work that I wanted to share. Next slide. Also significantly, about a year ago, or a little bit more than a year ago, the state put out a call for proposals for an immigrant assistance services program, and MIRA was able to receive that contract and then sub-grant a lot of the funds to our member organizations and other community partners. And the purpose of that program was to provide services to new arrivals in emergency assistance shelters. Massachusetts, like New York City, is a right to shelter state. And so families and pregnant people in need of shelter have access to our emergency assistance shelters, or did until very recently. And I can say more about that and will again, hopefully very soon after the passing of the supplemental budget that we just had yesterday. Our family shelter system now hosts about 7,500 families, and more than half of them are newly arrived immigrant families, with the vast majority being from Haiti. And so the Immigrant Assistance Services was really meant to be a program where legal service providers could work hand in hand with community-based organizations to provide services and culturally appropriate services. And so that looks like a mixture of on-site legal clinics, where we do a lot of the work that Carla just spoke about, the change of venue, which we are also seeing people with immigration court dates all over the country. So changes of venue, change of address, work authorization applications, and some very small number of asylum per se assistance. One of the biggest challenges, and I can reiterate this at the end, has been kind of finding more sustainable ongoing legal support, because one thing is kind of in a rapid fashion to address the immediate needs of, assisting people who are eligible to apply for work authorization, maybe even to meet a 1-year filing deadline on someone's asylum application, but then being able to continue to provide support and representation with these cases on the longer term is going to continue to be a huge challenge for us, given our legal services landscape. And then finally, through the IAS program and beyond, also developing a large volunteer network. We've had over 150 people who have expressed interest in volunteering through the IAS program. I think we've activated or mobilized about 40 volunteers through that program. So it's really allowed us to kind of grow that capacity as well. The program also provides a lot of training to community-based organizations and legal services partners, and a lot of community resource sharing. So we have shared intake procedures, shared information tracking, cross referrals, etc. And next slide. And the last rapid response effort that I wanted to talk about is that Massachusetts watched what New York did, as we often do, and observed and learned from it, and then try to replicate and adapt that model. And so the state collaborated with USCIS and mobilized pretty much every immigration organization and every immigration attorney in the state, as far as I could tell, to host 2 full weeks of work authorization clinics. They ran from 11 a.m. to well past 7 p.m. Nearly 1,200 work permit applications were submitted during that time, and almost 2,000 biometrics of photos and fingerprints were completed, not just for those who were filing work permit applications on site, but for those who perhaps had already filed but needed to have biometrics completed. The benefits of this, of course, was that people, could submit their applications, get a receipt notice, complete biometrics right away. And by the second week of the clinics, we had heard that some people in the first week of the clinic had already actually received their work permit. So it's a really quick turnaround. But we also trained and mobilized hundreds of volunteers. So not only working with the American Immigration Lawyers Association and all of the immigration legal services nonprofits in the state, but also hundreds of non-legal volunteers that received training on how to provide this support. On the flip side, and I guess I thought it was that important that I put it twice in the slide, so apologies for that. On the flip side, it was very limited, not only very limited in scope, because we were really only providing assistance with work permits and biometrics. Occasionally, depending on availability and need, we would do changes of address, change of venue, assistance, but really not much beyond that from folks who could really benefit from a broader legal assessment. But it was also limited to families that were in the emergency assistance shelter population, which of course is an especially vulnerable population. But we also heard from many of the community, we have folks coming in looking for services at our doors every day, and they're not in shelter, right? They're staying with a friend, or maybe they're in some other situation, or maybe they don't qualify because they're not part of a family unit or don't have minor children. And so there's kind of that difference in access to these services. And there were many other needs that were left unaddressed, right? Of course, people want to be able to get a work permit if they're eligible to get one, but we all know that that's not the end of their journey. And so there's lots more that can be done, and that needs to be done after that. And also concern for people that haven't found the front door, people that haven't found a local community-based organization that don't know that they can maybe try and go to a local hospital or even police station or airport and try and seek services. We just heard of a family yesterday that a healthcare provider encountered sleeping on the street in Cape Cod, that didn't know about the emergency assistance shelter programs, that kind of didn't know where to plug in. And those, of course, are the folks that we're most concerned about. So I think I'll stop there, and I look forward to answering questions. I saw there's lots of questions in the chat that are very kind of concrete, tangible, actionable items. So excited to talk about those.
Yes, thank you, Jessica, for that overview. And yeah, we have received a lot of questions here please make sure that folks, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A function, just so we can keep better track of the questions. And I see our panelists have been answering many of those already in writing. But one that I saw quite a bit was the timing, kind of how long it's been taking for the applications to be approved, work permits. And I see, Camille, you answered some of that. Wondering if you can speak more to that, the timing, and then also there was a question about fee waivers and the timing on that.
Yeah, so what we've been told by USCIS, which is sort of what I've been typing as an answer, is that for Venezuelan TPS, this is specific to Venezuelan TPS, they are committing to trying to get to a 30-day median processing time for the work authorization for the EAD, not for the entire TPS application, just for the EAD. And it could, when we asked them, they did concede that it could take slightly longer to process if you file by paper, which is what anybody requesting a fee waiver has to do. And for a variety of reasons, I think online filing just kind of gets into their system faster, but also because they have that extra adjudication to make, right? They have to adjudicate the fee waiver before they can decide whether they can proceed with the TPS and EAD applications. So I don't know if our colleagues in Massachusetts or in California have seen enough to see trends yet. I haven't heard of any sort of egregious delays in New York. It seems to be roughly falling within that 30-day period overall. But it might also just be still a little too early to draw any kind of conclusions.
Thank you, Camille. I don't know if the other panelists have any, is that what you've seen as well, the 30-day type of window?
I would say for us, it's hard to determine because it is on a pro se basis. So we're not, we're not receiving like the typical scenario where we would receive a copy of everything. So we have not heard or received complaints or any sort of feedback as of yet.
Yeah, and actually related to that, the pro se, strategies that CHIRLA is doing, I saw a few questions related to that. So wondering, Carla, if you can kind of talk a little bit more about some of those pro se strategies, that the resources that you are providing to folks, and is this something that can be scaled, to a larger group of people?
Yes, so we do, I answered one of the questions saying that I will share the template that we use with Luis so that we can upload it to any shared materials, but that's the template that we use also at our monthly consultation day right now. We do have, we do small groups of people and we help them fill out the motion so that they can send it on their own. And then we have an annotated change of address so that they can fill that out on their own as well. And then for the work permit applications right now, we just identified somebody to support us as a managing attorney for the program. And so he and I, Ivan is on this webinar actually. He and I are kind of working out how much we can do, how big we can go, even in terms of like the EADs, the work permits, kind of scaling them to a clinic size, kind of mirroring what we've done in the past with DACA. Back in 2017, we were doing 50 DACA renewals at a time, where DACA applicants would be filling out their work permits. Granted, the audience is a little bit different. There are more challenges, but that is something that we are considering, of just being able to help more people, because the need is always there, and we just feel like we can't ever do enough.
Thank you, Carla. So the next question here that I see is the collaboration with USCIS. Those questions came in different ways here in the Q&A. So I'll turn it to you, Jessica, in terms of kind of how that collaboration came about in Massachusetts, and if you can talk a little bit more about the work directly with them.
Yeah, so I have to say that we were able to benefit from that because of state coordination. So it's actually the state that reached out to USCIS, and I don't know how much folks have followed what's been happening in Massachusetts, but back in August, our governor stated that we were in a state of emergency with regard to new arrivals, and really called on the federal government to offer more support. There's lots more that I could say about all this, but that's all I'll say now. And so that support came, via staffing this EAD clinic, which was originally scheduled for 1 week and then extended by a second week, really following, as I said, the New York model. And that, I discovered when I was on site at this clinic several days that folks were, some of them local, but some of them being pulled from other states to be able to staff it. Every day we had about 10 USCIS folks on site all day long. I will say that it required acting really quickly, because once we heard that USCIS was willing to do this, they were basically saying, okay, we're willing to do this, but it has to be like in 10 days. And so that meant that we really had to do a rapid response in terms of getting volunteers to sign up, train, finding the location, addressing transportation, and all that. And the biggest piece that Mira did in prepping for those EAD clinics, in addition to having our staff taking part in staffing it, was providing the training. I trained, about 300 people on how to complete the work permit application, how to do quality control, how to do eligibility screening, etc.
Jessica, and I know we'll share some of those resources, in the folder that we'll share with everyone at the end. I know there was another question around best practices on training attorneys, and I saw some questions in the chat related to that. So I'll go back to Camille, for a question. I have a few questions around the documentation, especially for fee waivers, like if folks don't have the documentation already, what type of information you are including in the fee waiver application, and then also what happens with folks that may have already missed the notice to appear, for example.
Excellent questions, not entirely all related, but let me start with the fee waiver. On the fee waiver side, we developed a letter. So if you go to the USCIS website, you'll see that the USCIS website pretty clearly states that you don't have to use the form, the I-913, to request a fee waiver. And so we actually, with some partners, big shout out to Lutheran Immigrant Refugee Services and Jill Marie Bussey, who helped us. We developed just a one-page letter that lays out the requirements for the fee waiver. And this was done for the EAD clinics, which again, I think I either put in my answers or maybe I said out loud, we're meant to serve individuals living in shelters in New York City, or in hotel shelters upstate. And so we did a letter based on financial hardship as the basis for requiring the fee waiver. And that just that was one of our time cutting measures, right? That we did, because it's a 13-page form that we can just now have somebody just sign, put in their name and sign. It's very important to sign it. We had some rejections because people forgot to sign that letter. So that was a fee waiver. And then to that, we attached, for the folks in the shelters, a letter that New York City developed in partnership, well, not in partnership with USCIS, but USCIS did review it and say that it would meet their requirements, again, for financial hardship. So just as a reminder, there's a few different ways to qualify for a fee waiver. One is to establish that you have financial hardship and that you can't afford to pay the filing fee. Another one is to show that you are the recipient of a means-tested benefit. The shelter letter is not evidence of receiving a means-tested benefit. It is being used to show financial hardship, and so it's important to put that in the letter. It's also, there's been a lot of confusion, so I'm just going to say this really clearly. Our fee waiver letter is just meant to be a cover letter explaining why somebody is asking for a fee waiver, and then we use the shelter letter to be the evidence that supported that. You don't need either. You can fill out the form, you can write your own letter, and then in terms of showing financial hardship, you can show a pay stub, tax return, an affidavit saying you don't have employment and that's why you need a fee waiver, whatever the particular circumstances are, to be able to show that you have the financial hardship. Of course, if there is a means-tested benefit, Medicaid or, whatever public benefit that somebody might be receiving that's means-tested, you could always ask for a fee waiver under that category. We were doing it under financial hardship. And that's how we've sort of been working around that. And so in New York, if you're using the fee waiver letter, you need to sign it, you need to attach the shelter letter, or provide other evidence of financial hardship. Like I said, a tax return, an affidavit saying you're not working, a pay stub showing you're making less than 125% of the federal poverty guidelines, whatever evidence that looks like for you. The question about what happens if you missed your NTA, I assume that the question there is if somebody missed a hearing, and that is obviously a very specific fact pattern. Highly encourage you to find an attorney to work with, because there could be a few different things that could have happened at a minimum. And we're going to be launching a website, I think, next week that's going to have a lot of resources, including resources around how to check the status of your case online, or by calling the 1-800 EOIR number. You can find out what happened at that hearing, if you were ordered deported because you failed to appear, or if the judge closed the case or rescheduled the case. We've seen it all. It really just depends on the judge. And then, if you have another hearing, I would attend that hearing. If something else happened, you definitely want to talk to a lawyer. Unfortunately, in New York, we had a really great program that was funded by New York City that represented people with deportation proceedings. It's one of the victims of our mayor's many budget cuts in the last few weeks. So we're trying to figure out how legal service providers can address that.
Thank you, Camille. And I see there's a lot of questions coming in, and we only have a few minutes left here. So I just want to reiterate, that we'll make sure to look at all these questions, and maybe, we can come up with a Q&A, a frequently asked questions that we can share with everyone, as I know there's so many questions that folks have based on your specific work. And we will make sure to share it with everyone that attended here. So please make sure to continue sharing those questions. I think the last one that I know we heard, maybe in terms that we can quickly mention address, is confidentiality. Like, how do we ensure confidentiality in this type of clinics, especially working with volunteer attorneys and so many folks? So wondering if CHIRLA or Mira, you have any thoughts around that before we close?
Sure, I can go first. I mean, that's always a concern, right? When you're working with lots of folks, especially if you're working with lots of people in the same space. And we see this is nothing new to this type of clinic setting, right? We see this when we do our citizenship clinics as well. So all volunteers, I mean, of course, if you're an attorney, you're already bound by ethical rules of confidentiality, but all volunteers will generally sign an agreement of confidentiality. And then we do what we can in the space. My experience with the EAD clinic, where we had, 500 people in one large hangar, essentially, was that there's so much background noise that you can barely hear the person right in front of you, let alone, the person 5 feet away having a separate conversation. But, would love to hear what others have to say on this as well.
We haven't gone, as I've mentioned, we haven't gone that big a scale, but historically, it's just really driving home the point of what we are there for. As Jessica mentioned, as attorneys, we do have our duties owed to the client, and then also just letting clients know the space that they are in is, for general, let's keep it as general as possible. Let's not divulge personal information or personal details of their case. We will reserve time so that there is, if it's a must, then we will reserve time for that one question, but we do try to limit that as much as possible, saying that unfortunately the purpose of the space is to be able to help as many people as we can at once, and so that it's not conducive to specific questions.
Thank you, Carla. And I know we're almost at time, so I want to thank all the panelists for sharing, and turn the time over to Leanne to close us out on next steps and call to action.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you all so much, first of all, for the 300 plus of you that were here with us live today, for the additional 300 people that are going to be watching this recording. Like Luis said, our incredible panelists. Luis, you're an amazing moderator. It's just what a great event. Really quickly, if you have not had your question answered, please put it in the Q&A function because we're going to export that. And like Louise said, try to compile some sort of frequently asked questions. We will be emailing the recording and resources, but right here is your opportunity. Scan this QR code and you will come to a Google Drive with lots of resources discussed today. We will probably be adding more. So I'm going to give you a second to do that. And then I have one more slide with contact information for everyone. As a matter of fact, Sarah, would you mind just skipping to the next slide for 1 second? So everybody can take a quick picture. Snap a picture of this. And again, this will be in our materials, but just so you have it. And then, Sarah, sorry, one more time, going back to our QR code. I just want to make sure this is the big deal. Make sure everyone has this. And look at us. We stayed perfectly on time, 1 full hour chock full of information. We hope you all got a lot out of it. I think you did, just based on everything I heard. Thanks for being here. And we will be supporting you in coming weeks, months. Go to immigrantarc.org. Where our recording will also be living. So you have plenty of time and plenty of ways to reach out to us and to get information. Thank you all again. Have a wonderful day, and we will certainly be talking to you soon.
Thank you, everyone.